Look, folks, nobody's ever seen anything like this before. Nobody. I walk into the Oval Office, a place I rebuilt with strength, with power, with incredible energy, and I hear people saying, "Oh, this is a loss." A loss? Give me a break. Let me tell you something very clearly. This wasn't a loss. This was sabotage. Total sabotage by weak people, very weak people. People who couldn't win anything on their best day, okay? I've won more than anyone in history. Ask anybody. They said it was major. Major. That's the word they love to use. The fake news loves it. They wake up every morning thinking, how do we attack Trump today? And I'll tell you, what they did was disgraceful. Absolutely disgraceful. I'm sitting there, beautiful desk, best desk made of history, and they hand me numbers. Bad numbers. Numbers that don't make sense. Numbers that nobody believes. And I said, wait a minute. These aren't my numbers. These aren't America's numbers. You know what happened? The system failed. Again. The same broken system that's afraid of strength, afraid of borders, afraid of winning, afraid of saying America first because it actually works. People were panicking, staff running around, whispering, leaking, always leaking. And I said, calm down. Because when Trump is under pressure, that's when Trump is at his best. They want you to think I lost it. No, I saw it clearly. This was a moment to expose corruption, a moment to show the American people who's fighting for them and who's hiding behind excuses. Let me be very honest, this only made me stronger, stronger than ever before. Because when they hit Trump, they're really hitting you, the workers, the forgotten men and women, the people who are tired of being lied to. And I looked around that Oval Office and I said, we're not done, not even close. They can celebrate, they can laugh on television, they can put up their little headlines, but remember this, every time they say Trump is finished, Trump comes back bigger, louder, stronger. This isn't the end, this is the warning, because America doesn't lose, and neither do I, believe me. They want to call it a loss, but I'll tell you right now very strongly, very clearly, it wasn't real. It wasn't legitimate, it wasn't earned, it was manufactured, engineered, and pushed through a system that has been broken for a very long time. I've seen winning, I've built winning, I know winning better than anyone, and this wasn't a loss. This was something very different, something much darker. This was the kind of thing that happens when weak people are scared of strength and powerful ideas. You look at what happened and nothing lines up. The numbers don't line up. The process doesn't line up, the timing doesn't line up, and when things don't line up, you have to ask questions. Smart people ask questions. That's what leaders do. Only fools accept things at face value, and America has had enough fools running the show. I was handed results and told to accept them, to move on, to smile for the cameras. That's not leadership, that's surrender. This system, the same system that failed our borders, failed our workers, failed our cities, is the same system that suddenly expects blind trust. They say trust the process, but the process has been failing for decades. It failed factories, it failed farmers, it failed families, and now they want you to believe it suddenly works perfectly when it matters most to them. That's not how reality works. What they did was take advantage of chaos. They took advantage of confusion. They took advantage of people who don't have a voice, and they used complexity as a weapon. They hide behind rules nobody understands, procedures nobody voted for, and experts who are never accountable. And when someone challenges it, when someone stands up and says this isn't right, they scream, they attack, they label, they try to crush them. I've watched it for years. The moment you threaten their control, the moment you show the American people that things can actually be better, they panic. And when they panic, they cheat the system in ways that are hard to see but easy to feel. People feel it. Workers feel it. Parents feel it. They know when something isn't honest. They call it democracy. But democracy only works when it's transparent, when it's fair, when it's simple enough that ordinary people can trust it. What happened was none of those things. It was wrapped in confusion, rushed decisions, last-minute changes, and constant pressure to stay quiet. Silence was rewarded. Questioning was punished. I was told this was how it's always been done. That's the most dangerous sentence in politics. That's how bad systems survive. That's how corruption hides in plain sight. Because once people stop questioning, once they accept unfairness as normal, the system wins and the people lose. They want to call it a major loss, to humiliate, to weaken, to send a message that resistance is pointless. But history shows something very different. Every time someone tries to expose a broken system, the system fights back harder than ever. That's how you know you're over the target. That's how you know you're threatening something real. You don't see this kind of reaction when someone is irrelevant. You don't see this level of coordination, media obsession, and sudden rule changes when someone isn't a threat. They wouldn't work this hard if there wasn't something they were desperate to protect. Power hates sunlight. Corruption hates attention. They say accept it and move on for the good of the country, but the country doesn't benefit from lies. Stability built on dishonesty collapses eventually. You can delay the truth, but you can't bury it forever. Systems that silence questions don't last. They crack, they leak, and they expose themselves. What happened wasn't about one moment or one outcome. It was about control, about deciding who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and who gets pushed aside. And the people being pushed aside are the ones who work the hardest and complain the least. They just want fairness. They want rules that apply to everyone. I've been in negotiations all my life. I know when something is off. I know when the other side is rushing you, distracting you, telling you there's no time to look closer. That's exactly what happened. Pressure, noise, urgency, all designed to prevent scrutiny, because scrutiny is the enemy of manipulation. They underestimate the American people. They think if they repeat something enough times, it becomes true. But people aren't stupid. They see the double standards. They see how certain mistakes are forgiven instantly while others are weaponized. They see how accountability only goes in one direction. Calling this a loss is convenient for them. It closes the conversation. It shuts down debate. It tells people to stop thinking, but I won't do that. I won't pretend something is fair when it isn't. I won't tell people to accept a system that doesn't respect them. This wasn't about ego. This was about integrity, about saying that rules matter, transparency matters, and outcomes must be earned, not engineered. When a system fears examination, it exposes itself. When it attacks anyone who asks questions, it reveals its weakness. They can label, mock, and shout, but they can't change what people saw and felt. They can't erase the sense that something wasn't right. And that feeling doesn't disappear just because headlines move on. It stays, it grows, it waits. Because once people realize a so-called loss was built on manipulation, once they understand how the system protects itself, they start demanding change. And that's what scares them the most. Not one person, not one moment, but millions of people refusing to be told to look away, refusing to be silenced, refusing to accept a rigged outcome as normal. They went into full panic mode, and you could see it immediately. The media, the so-called experts, the insiders who live off leaks and anonymous quotes, they all started talking at once, talking fast, talking loud, talking over each other. That's how you know they're nervous. When things are calm, they whisper. When they're scared, they shout, and they were shouting everywhere. The fake news didn't even wait. No verification, no balance, no questions, just headlines, flashing graphics, dramatic music, all designed to create one image: chaos. They wanted people to think everything was falling apart, that I was out of control, that the walls were closing in. They've used that same script for years because it's the only one they know. Fear sells, panic distracts, and confusion protects the people who benefit from it. What they never show is what really happens behind the scenes. They don't show the calm. They don't show the focus. They don't show the decision-making. They don't show strength because strength doesn't fit their narrative. A leader who stays composed under pressure doesn't help their ratings. So they invent drama. They exaggerate expressions. They turn raised voices into meltdowns and firm decisions into tantrums. The elites love this moment because it gives them a chance to feel important again. These are people who've never built anything real. They've never negotiated a tough deal. They've never had thousands of jobs on the line. But suddenly they're experts in leadership, experts in composure, experts in how power should look. They sit comfortably and judge from a distance, protected from consequences. Inside that building, What they call panic was actually urgency. What they call chaos was intensity. Big decisions don't get made in silence. They get made when people are moving, thinking, challenging each other. That's leadership. That's how results happen. Weak people confuse motion with disorder because they're used to doing nothing. The media saw movement and assumed loss of control because they don't understand momentum. They're used to scripted press conferences and pre-approved talking points. When something doesn't follow their expectations, they label it dangerous. They've been trained to fear anything they can't predict or control, and the so-called elites followed right along. Former officials, consultants, career insiders who rotate between government and television studios, all nodding in agreement, all repeating the same phrases. You could almost hear the relief in their voices. This was their moment to say, "See, we told you so," even if they didn't know what they were talking about. They don't like outsiders. They don't like disruption. They don't like someone who doesn't owe them favors. So when pressure hits, they hope it breaks you. They hope you retreat. They hope you apologize and fall back into line. That's what they're used to seeing. That's how the club protects itself. But pressure reveals character. Weak leaders freeze. Strong leaders focus. And that's the part they refuse to show. Instead, they cherry-pick moments, cut clips out of context, repeat them endlessly until repetition replaces truth. They know most people don't have time to dig deeper, so they rely on volume instead of facts. You could feel their excitement. It wasn't concern for the country. It wasn't responsibility. It was opportunity. An opportunity to reclaim control, to reassert dominance, to remind everyone who they think is supposed to run things. Panic isn't always loud. Sometimes it smiles behind a microphone. They wanted to define the moment before anyone else could. That's why the stories came out so fast, so coordinated. Same language, same framing, same conclusions. That doesn't happen by accident. That happens when narratives are ready in advance, waiting for a trigger. They call themselves guardians of democracy, but they don't trust the public to think for themselves. They assume people need to be guided, steered, nudged toward the correct interpretation. Any alternative view is dismissed as dangerous. Any challenge is labeled irresponsible. What really scared them was not what happened, but what it represented. It showed that their influence isn't absolute, that their control over perception isn't guaranteed, that even with all their platforms, they still feel threatened by a voice that doesn't depend on their approval. So they exaggerated, they dramatized, they framed determination as anger and resolve as instability. They've always done that. It's a classic move. If you can't beat someone on substance, attack their temperament. If you can't refute their ideas, question their sanity. And the elites played their role perfectly, quietly pushing the story, amplifying the right voices, suppressing others, all while claiming neutrality. That's how modern power works. It doesn't announce itself. It pretends to be objective. But people notice patterns. They notice how certain figures are always defended and others are always attacked. They notice how similar mistakes are treated differently depending on who makes them. Over time, that becomes impossible to ignore. They hoped panic would spread, that supporters would doubt, that momentum would slow. That's why they framed urgency as desperation. They needed the image to stick before facts could catch up. Instead, what they revealed was themselves. Their fear of losing relevance, their fear of losing control of the story, their fear that people might stop trusting them. And when institutions that rely on trust show fear, that trust erodes even faster. This wasn't about one day or one reaction. It was about a system showing its reflexes: attack first, question later, control the narrative at all costs. That instinct tells you everything you need to know, because when the fake news and weak elites panic together, it's not because something collapsed, it's because something challenged them. And they respond the only way they know how: louder voices, coordinated outrage, and relentless repetition, hoping noise can drown out clarity.